Hi, Natasha here, and welcome to another episode of She Travels After Quarantine, where we help you and give you the resources to have amazing adventures, travel the world with confidence, and find happiness within. On today's episode, I have Tonya. I don't know if you've noticed, but I usually leave out their last names because I'm not really good at pronouncing last names. Another story for another day. But Tonya is part of World Footprints. It's this amazing blog that not only talks about travel, but it really talks about all the global issues that we may not know about, or maybe we do know about and we're a little bit scared to find out more because we think that we can't create change or really help out that issue. So her whole purpose is really to make sure that, we are being aware of the way we travel and helping us understand and really helping us create a difference. So I'm super excited to have her on the show. Tonya, thank you so much for being with us today. Welcome. Tonya, thank you so much for being with us today. Welcome to the show.
Oh, Natasha, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
And for everyone that's watching right now and may not know who you are yet, why don't you take a moment to kind of walk us through, how you came up with World Footprints, your blog, and also really how you got to where you are today.
Well, how much time do we have?
We have a lot because we're staying at home a lot. So
right. Well, I'm trying to be a recovering attorney, so I've had a very eclectic career to this point, but it's the I'd say disillusionment with the legal profession and the knowledge that there was something else I needed to do with my life, that there was something purposeful I needed to do, is how we came to World Footprints. The Cliff Note version is my husband and I met a life coach when we were traveling. She gave him prompts. He life coached me later that night in our hotel room. And I determined, my passions, where my passions lie. And they lie with horses and travel. And in the travel, both of them go back to my childhood, is when they started fostering. And we decided to open a travel agency. And we both started doing a lot of television in DC on the major networks and some live cast shows. And that caught the attention of a top radio station here. They invited us to do a travel show. And really the rest is history. And we've been going ever since. And really when we started, we had a specific purpose, and that purpose was to connect people through travel, to help them live their best lives through travel, and to really appreciate the common humanity that we share. That was our sole purpose. And with the travel agency, our sole purpose was to allow people to live their best lives through travel, to find some purpose and meaning in their travels, and to connect people. And that message morphed into what we're doing now with World Footprints. We've since closed the travel agency because I found that I like this side of travel much more than selling tickets.
yeah.
And it's grown so much. Now, we started talking about sustainability and human rights even, when a lot of people weren't, some were, but this has been part of our DNA ever since. We speak to a very niche audience, but that's okay because they're also loyal audience members. And and the word is getting out. People, especially now after what we're going through, people have developed a larger conscientiousness about the world and how we use the resources of this world and how we treat each other.
Mhm.
So, World Footprints has had a very impactful message to share with people,
Yeah.
so this is where we are.
Yeah, I love that. And the name, by the way, is very fitting too, that with everything that you are doing. And I know that you focus a lot on, responsible ways of traveling. How can we be sustainable while we're going to the next city over, or like living within, close to our homes, or if we're traveling across the world? So could you tell us maybe like 5 do's and 5 don'ts on how to be more aware, and, what does it really mean to travel responsibly to you?
Well, I think responsible travel encompasses many things. At its core, I think, is respect for our
Mhm.
natural resources and our fellow citizens.
Mhm.
And so, some of the things we can do that will help in keeping the planet where it has reset to right now
Yeah.
is limiting our use of single-use plastic.
Mhm.
There was a study done by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation recently who uh, de- determined that by 2050, there will be more plastic in the oceans than there will be fish. And
Oh,
that's alarming to me. Now, I don't think they mean, by piece, like plastic by piece, but by weight, there will
like,
be more
yeah,
plastic.
volume. Yeah.
Yeah, if we continue with the type of use that we are doing with plastic, I mean, it's a necessary evil, and I don't know if we can limit plastic use entirely, but we can certainly limit our use of single-use plastic, like with travel cups and
Mhm.
travel cutlery and paper straws, or and I have used, and I'm sorry, I'm digressing a little bit because this is very passionate for me, but I have used plant-based cutlery, and it's just as sturdy
Yeah.
as anything else, so there's no reason why we shouldn't be using those products. Um, I think something responsibly we can do is when we travel to other places, take some time to research, societal norms and
Yeah.
traditions. Um, there are places, for example, in China, in Middle East countries where your shoulders have to be covered, and you may have to remove your shoes walking into a temple.
Mhm.
And so understanding the local and cultural norms, I think, is very responsible to do. And along that vein, learn a couple of words in the local language, just pleasantries like
Yeah.
please and thank you. The words we're taught to say as children, please and thank you, and in other languages, I think it means a lot. um, I think we need to rethink animal tourism. There's a difference between, yeah, yeah. So there's a difference between going to a reserve to help or to photograph animals being cared for
Yeah.
versus riding an elephant through, the rainforest, or treks in Thailand, or hopping on a camel in Cabo San Lucas, for goodness sakes,
Yeah.
or even going on a dolphin, swimming with dolphins in a park. There's a huge difference between the animals that are being cared for and the animals who are being used for tourist benefits, and I'll say misused for
Yeah.
tourist benefits. Um, Oh, I think something very important is also to be mindful of how we're spending our tourist dollars, and to make sure we're spending them locally,
Yes.
because a lot of these, the resorts, the cruise ships, we just came off a cruise ship a month ago, right as we went into shutdown.
Oh my goodness.
And that's not our preferred way of traveling by any means, but we had friends who got married. And so anyways, as we got off the cruise ship, we had to walk through, there's this huge market set up, kind of like the duty-free stations, zigzag pathways, and you can't find how to get out of it. But those dollars, even though they're being spent on, at the destination, those dollars feed the cruise ship, the shareholders of the cruise ships, same as resorts. And so when you go out into the public area where the locals are and spend your money that way to buy your souvenirs, even to sample food, the local food, which is part of the travel, tradition, right? I mean, it's part of the experience. That those dollars go a lot farther in those communities outside of the gated areas than than spending your money there. And and it means a lot, because a lot of these places that we travel to, even if we're on a luxury cruise ship or at a luxury resort, a lot of these places are impoverished.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of these places, like in the Dominican Republic, for example, the communities outside of the resorts in Punta Cana, they don't have fresh water. Those filter stations are created for the resort only. So I think it's important to be mindful about that. And another thing is, we also have to be mindful about sacred grounds. There are places like Uluru, in the Uluru Rock in Australia. It's a beautiful, iconic natural resource, but there's parts of it that are sacred and can't be photographed. And so, there's angles that you can't photograph because it's sacred.
Yeah.
And I know some people push the envelope and they take the photos anyways, but it's incredibly disrespectful. I was on a trip, several months ago in Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
And just to give you an example, that sometimes travel journalists and so-called influencers cannot, need to exercise responsibility too. And so at this particular trip, there were a couple of influencers, and I don't like that word, but
Yeah, it's such it's such a new word, because it means different things now, especially when Instagram entered the scene. I think it has
Mhm.
created a different meaning, and there's positives and negatives depending on how they interact as
Right.
an influencer.
Yeah. And, I mean, there are good influencers. I was on the same trip
Yeah.
with influencers, so I guess World Footprints is considered an influencer too. But I'll just say, these particular influencers were focused on the gram, and that's a whole nother
Yeah.
thing that I'll mention right after the story. We were on somebody's property, and we were photographing these stone circles. And the stone
Mhm.
circles were used by and continue to be used in some communities by druids, and so it's sacred to them. And so the stone circles, there's a white stone in the middle of the circle, and some of the photographer influence wanted to remove the white stone because it conflicted with their white robes. So they came dressed to see this site, this attraction, in something that mirrored wedding clothes.
Mm. Mhm.
So anyways, um and they wanted to remove this stone, and a few of us were like, no, first of all, we're on somebody else's property. We don't know if these stones are used for, spiritual purposes these days. We don't know. And I, I was just really disappointed in their request. They didn't get their way, obviously. I think the majority of us, and it was just a small group of influencers who were taken on this trip. But we won out. But with regards to the gram, I think one thing that's incredibly important not to do is put yourself and others in harm's way to get that bloody photo, the money shot. People have died for what? For a photograph. And sometimes when you're living behind the lens, and I do that as a photographer, a lot, it's hard to really enjoy the the destination.
Yeah.
And I think it's more important that we do that now. And I think a lot of people are going to start taking more meaning and finding more meaning in their trips now, because they've been taken away from us right now.
And I think it's so interesting though, but I mean, every single point that you just discussed, the animal abuse that we're seeing across the world, I think in some ways, when we're not right in front of something, so traveling through cruise ships and being surrounded by these filtered really shops that are done by the big resorts too, we never take a step back to really look at what's really going on in the place where you're traveling. And like you said, $1 can help so much. I mean, especially, I'm from Argentina. I was born and raised there. When I go back, it makes me really sad to see how my country, the economy is so bad there. Right now, this might have changed by now because it changes every day, but $1 is 62 pesos. So imagine that when somebody like myself, that I make a living with dollars, and you and anybody that's traveling with euros or dollars, or we go to a country like this and we only stay in places where are ran by politics and people with money, people that are like really up high, and instead we don't venture out a couple of blocks away. And I know that there's a really big thing where is it safe for me to do that? And that's something, again, with this community, the community that you've created, the community that I want to create. I want to be able to help people access those little places, because you get so much from it too. Whenever, I don't know if you felt this way when you've traveled and it feels like a lot of the trip has been very touristy, and and you don't take anything away from it. I went to Peru when I went to Machu Picchu, beautiful place, but it felt very touristy to me. I kept giving like all my dollars away to really big companies. And then when I went to Chile, I stayed in the middle of the desert in a town that only had 100 people. And they also have the sea. When I think about that trip, that was the most meaningful, most beautiful moments that I had. And it was when I stayed with the actual locals. So I think you brought up a point that, I mean, we could have a whole conversation around each point that you talked about, really. But yeah, no, it's really just about, and also, like you said, the most important thing is being respectful. Because it's different culture, so we have to understand, just because in my country we give hugs, but maybe when I go to South America or Europe, we do kisses, and it's okay. So,
well, and like in Italy, and I can say this because part of my life was spent with my Italian godfather. So, I was immersed in Italian culture. Italians like to enjoy their meals. and they may take 4 hours to get
Yes.
to, pudding or dessert at the end of the meal. And to some people that might frustrate them, particularly here, because everyone's go, go, go. And where I am in Washington, D.C., I mean, at least, along the East Coast, it's a very fast-paced life, and so that may frustrate somebody, in traveling to Italy, but that's part of the culture. And trying the local food is part of the travel experience. You don't go to McDonald's in China. Why would you go to China? It's like buying locally made crafts, and not go to a market that produces, even if it's outside of the borders of the resort or
Yeah.
cruise terminal. There's some markets that have mass-produced crafts, all produced from China. Like, why would you go to Argentina or South Africa or wherever to buy something made in China?
And do you think, I know that since we're on the topic of that, do you think that, by immersing yourself in the local culture, that once, not, you may not notice in the moment, but when you come back from that trip, do you think it helps you grow in some ways?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as I've said before, any person who says that they haven't changed slightly after a trip needs to have their pulse checked, because I don't know, maybe they're a zombie. Because and that's a beautiful thing about travel, is the opportunity to connect with other people who are different from you, who look different from you, but by doing that, you get to recognize the similarities you share. And to some people, that really broadens their mind, because they may have had a preconception about a culture before they traveled to this destination. And I one of the stories I talk about in a couple of my TEDx talks and other stories is about a woman that we interviewed for our podcast, who's a jazz artist.
Yeah.
She returned to jazz later in life, and so her manager booked her for a tour in Germany, and she didn't want to go. She's an African American woman, and she didn't want to go because she felt Germans were prejudiced. That's what she grew up believing. I think her parents, they come from the World War II era. And so she ended up going and discovered, something completely shocking, that German people love jazz, and they loved her, and they embraced her. And she told me in this interview, she said, "Tonya, I was so embarrassed as an African American woman growing up with racism, that I too demonstrated racism towards another culture." And and so that, by traveling, that trip transformed her, and it transformed her opinion about German people. And today she calls Germany her second home. I think she actually has a second home in Germany.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and that's really what travel is about. Even I know we're in the middle of a pandemic right now, and that travel industry will change completely 100%. But I think even just, stepping away from your comfort zone and really being empathetic to someone else's situation, right? And I think if we all had just a little experience like that, I think the world would be in such better shape right now, conceptually, emotionally, physically, right? Even just talking again, going back to the consumption of plastic. This is something that, we don't directly see how it affects us, but we only react once it's so bad. So I think it's really just kind of reteaching ourselves how can we go back to basics and start adding the essentials, right?
Yeah. Well, part of that, I think, is to, to commit to looking at travel through a child's eyes.
Yes.
And, about a year or so ago, I was traveling on a plane, and I saw these two kids, they different families. So one was an African American family, one was a Caucasian family, and they were sitting back to back. And in the front row, the closer row, the whatever, there's a little blonde boy, and there's a little black girl in the row behind him. And every once in a while, he would peek up over, look at her over the, over the chairs, and then pop back down. And she started giggling, and then she jumped up and started peeking over, to see him. And they played this little dance. They did this little dance for about 5 minutes. And, I just enjoyed it so much. I didn't even have time to grab my camera to photograph them, because it was just so beautiful. But I thought to myself, these are two tiny little humans who don't see color. They just see appear. They see, and one was a boy, one was a girl. So they're, and it was just such a beautiful moment to witness. And I think if we went through life like that, if we used the gift of travel and looked at it through the innocent eyes of a child, boy, would things be different. I mean, and you don't go to war with people you break bread with, with your family.
Yes.
So.
That's beautiful. I think, that's why I'm so passionate about travel too, is because it really opens up that space that, as a kid, you don't realize what you're learning from your culture, your parents, what they were taught. And it's really not their fault. We're not trying to find someone that it's responsible for all this convoluted thinking. But, as a person that cares, we have to become, like you said, responsible and respectful. But what do you think? Have you done any solo traveling yourself?
I have. And, and I loved it. And I'd be traveling if I weren't married. I've taken trips without him, just because sometimes one of us have to work. But it's been some of my favorite travel experiences. And and I've shared a couple of stories about that experiences, and just my own come to Jesus experiences I've had with my own preconceptions about other cultures. One in particular was when I was on a train between Vienna and Budapest, Hungary. And I came upon, or a South African family came upon me. I was in a train car by myself, and I didn't want to sit with them because I assumed, as South Africans, they wouldn't enjoy my presence because I'm a woman of color. And at the end of the day, some of them sat with me because there's only room for 6 people, and there were 6 of them. So 2 of them went off to another car. And the ones who sat with me, we had the best time. And I ended up touring Budapest with them, and I shared a hotel with the mother of the group. And and just as a caveat, I all I knew about South Africa at that time was apartheid, and apartheid had already been over. I mean, years had gone by, but that's all I knew from the news. And this happened when I first started traveling, way back in the day, and so that was my wake-up call, and that's what travel did for me. And that's why when I talk to other people, and of course I've shared this on the TEDx stage, I've done 3 TEDx talks and some internet, so I have a lot of stories. But I talk about finding your own truth, and I think it's important that we find our own truth in the world about other people and other cultures, because we are inundated with a lot of noise from maybe our parents or misinformed friends. And God, today we have social media, and sometimes all I hear is blah blah blah. But we have to take it upon ourselves to learn, and to go and go with a commitment to being intentional and to being open-minded. And I think that, will change a travel experience for anybody.
Yeah, and as when you did do the solo traveling as a woman, um, I mean, to me, that's a whole, again, different topic that we can talk about for hours. But how did you feel on like the first trip that you took on? Did you get any pushback from family and friends that you were going to go on this trip on your own? And now that, you're married, how do you navigate that? Because, a lot of women that are watching us right now, they may feel that because they are married that they can't really do travel or do things on their own because they have to be committed to their partner or their husband, 100%. So they can't separate themselves from the married women category, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we create that space where, we're still us and we're still working on ourselves, but it's, we have different areas where we have different hats in some ways, right? So how did you feel like the first time you went on your own, and how do you now handle, navigating that as a married woman too?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first time I traveled on my own, I was excited. I think I was born an explorer. I used to create make-believe countries when I'd ride my bike around the neighborhood. But the sense of exploration has always been ingrained in me, and so I was very excited.
Yeah.
My parents actually raised us girls to be very independent. I think they were very nervous because my first trip occurred solo. Well, I lived in England for a while, and before that, I spent a summer in Russia. And so my first trip was actually when I moved abroad, um, and that made everybody nervous. But they knew that they knew me, and they knew I'd do it anyways because
Yeah.
I've always been that kind of disagreeable kid. So yeah, but I was excited. I was excited for the challenge, because I know, if you're not challenging yourself, if you don't move out of your comfort zone, even a smidge, you're not going to grow. And so, I saw that as an opportunity to grow. Now, how I navigate with my husband, we just have an understanding. He knew he married a traveler,
Yeah.
and he knew that he married somebody who's incredibly passionate about travel. And I knew that he enjoyed travel as well because I vetted him before I even dated him. I made sure he traveled abroad. I'm serious. I wasn't going to date him if he didn't have a stamped passport. um, so, but yeah, so he's very patient and accepting of that. Now he doesn't like it when I go by myself, but I've been traveling. This year I've traveled at the beginning of this year when we could travel. I traveled a lot without him because I was doing some trainings as well, some
Yeah.
video production trainings. And when I'm away, we touch base in the morning and then the evening. When I was in India speaking a couple of years ago, it was hard to navigate the time zone, but
I'm
we
sure.
managed.
Yeah.
So and um, that's how I'm able to kind of share the travel experience with him as well.
Mhm.
Same thing when I was in Colombia, and he was very nervous about me traveling to Colombia by myself. I was actually with two other journalists who I had met on that trip, and we touched base twice a day. We don't have children. We have a cat who requires a babysitter.
That's a kid. That's
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And he might come bounding in here at some point. Um, but, you know, he's okay with it. But because we don't I'm sorry, so because we have our cat, we don't have a children. I don't have those responsibilities that maybe many other women do.
right.
However, I have friends, very dear friends and colleagues who are parents and who are travel journalists, as well, and their husbands will stay home with the children. um, you know, when they travel for a week or two at a time, and you know, and they're not gone a lot, and I think it's just an understanding that they
Yeah.
have, and an acceptance that this is, you know, this is my spouse's work, this is
Yeah.
what he or she does, you know, to make money. And so I think from that standpoint, it's easier for journalists and for people who just want to go. You know, golly, there's you know, guys have these guy weekends all the time. Why can't we?
Exactly. Yeah. And again, it goes back to really that narrative that we've been told since little girls, you know?
Mhm.
It's like you're supposed to like pink, boys like blue, and your whole life you gone to believe that this is the only truth. You
Yeah,
know, it's still true. I mean, some girls will like pink and some guys will like blue, but it's not the ultimate truth. And like you said, you have to find your own truth. And once
right.
you do that, it's everything just kind of you start attracting everything good in your life. And what are, and which brings me again, and you know, relating and solo traveling and just being a woman in this world, and like what do you think that means to you to be a woman in the world, and maybe some similarities that you've discovered from traveling the world that as women we might not know that we have in common? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, from my travels, from my appointment as a delegate to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, from my friendships, you know, from my circle, women around we have grit. That's what we
Yeah.
have in common. We have grit. And I think we undersell ourselves a lot. I think a lot of it is how we're socialized, as you said, um, and and so, you know, I think we need to give ourselves permission to honor who we are, um, in order, you know, to keep this. I mean, I think we have movement right now in the female gender community, and so I love being a woman. I think we're part of, you know, a new revolution right now, which is wonderful to see. You know, some of the things that, you know, we may not think about that we share in common are some of the things we've heard about in this country. You know, the Me Too movement, gender inequality, uh, in education and in the workplace. Those things happen, you know, all over the world, as well. And I saw that at the UN. I saw, there were conferences on bullying on social media. You know, we're dealing with that here. They are dealing with that, the same thing all around the world, and countries, you know, in Africa and in Europe and Asia. And so, we have the same challenges, I think, as, you know, I mean, as women around the world, we have a lot of the same challenges. Where the differences lie, perhaps, is that in the United States and in Europe, you know, those are developed countries. And I think women in developing countries have far worse circumstances. You know, they are the slave laborers. They are, I was going to say they are the human traffic, but so are we here. That's another thing that we raise awareness about is human trafficking. But it's in the developing countries. I think some of the concern is that women are forced or encouraged to sell their children for money because of
Yes.
the poverty levels. Here, people, golly, I could tell you stories because I've interviewed some survivors, but people are trafficked for either they're profiled online, they're profiled in a shopping mall, and those relationships with traffickers are cultivated.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, Natasha, I digressed, but
No,
that's another.
no, this is beautiful. I think these are the things that we don't talk about. And we're, again, with social media, going back to that, I think we're getting a very filtered side of traveling. And
Mm-hmm,
oftentimes we tend to, we wake up in the morning and what do? We scroll all down our phones. We start comparing ourselves to these people that, out of 500 images, they post that one picture, and we don't
mm-hmm.
think about that. And that's also, I think, it's affecting the way that we view ourselves as women. And
Yeah.
also, again, just painting a very, very filtered image of what travel is. And so I love that you're bringing attention to these things because they are happening, just like
Mm-hmm.
the pandemic that we're going through. It is happening, but here we are talking about how travel has changed our lives. It doesn't mean that we are completely hiding the pandemic, but it's really just finding our truth and how can we critically analyze our experiences and help, have those experiences help us grow, really. So
Mm-hmm.
everything that you're bringing up is just so beautiful. And I'm sure everybody that's watching us too, it's, they may not know about it yet, or they've been curious to find out about it. And, as I feel like your resume on paper probably takes up like a whole book. You've done so much, so impressive. I mean, just even be talking to you, it's just like such an honor. And do you ever experience the imposter syndrome? So
Yeah. Yeah.
there you go, ladies. Everybody, even if you're someone like Tonya, where she's done 3 TED Talks, she runs literally the whole world as a
Oh,
woman.
I wish.
She has the imposter. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I mean, we all have bad days, and there's days when I think, and I think just to back up, I think the imposter syndrome comes when we compare ourselves to other people,
Yeah.
and that is just that's a no-no. Don't do it. It's hard. I I find myself comparing where I am to where Oprah is.
Yes.
Come on. Oprah has a lot more years on me, and but I feel like, oh, I want to be where Oprah is. I idolize Oprah. I think she's fantastic, and I don't want to be Oprah. I do want to be Tonya in the travel space the way Oprah is in the Oprah space.
Mm-hmm.
And so but I have days when I'm like, oh gosh, why isn't this happening? Why did this guest say no, or what? So I have those days, and I think also that it comes from my one of my biggest character flaws, which is perfectionism. And I think we all share in that. We all, meaning women and some men too. I don't want to leave the guys out. Um, but because we're socialized to be perfect little ladies, and
Yes.
um, and I don't think we give ourselves enough room and grace. when we fail and when things don't go our way. And so that's when that ugly imposter, and I'm just going to give her a name. I may call her Agnes or something. I don't know. That's when Agnes comes in and plays with my little gray cells.
I love that. I think giving it a name, it makes it less intimidating.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, now it's like a person that's, in some ways trying to sabotage you. So you're like,
Hmm.
no, you're not going to do that to me today. Um, so yeah, I always like to ask that question because again, to me, you know, coming into the space, I have travel experience, but not, I guess, media experience, right? And so to look at everyone that's coming on the show and I see everything that they've done right before the interview, I do get a little bit nervous.
Oh, well,
So,
see, that's that. And I've told myself, and I've shared with other people, I truly believe we all have our own individual gifts.
yeah,
Your gift is different from my gift, and it's different from the next guest you'll have on. And so when we can't expect, I can't expect to learn how to do what you've done with your career. I would like to, but I don't have the time. And so, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice, again, when it comes to comparing, with other people. And I think when we learn to honor what our gifts are and allow those gifts to be of service, we
yeah,
can't ask for anything more than that.
yeah, yeah, I love that. And also, I think that helps a lot in terms of, you can be competitive. I think competition is healthy if it's
Mm,
balanced. But also, growing up as women, we are taught that we're in competition to every other woman. And that, there's, if somebody else is already doing something that you want to do, you can't do
mhm,
it because they're already doing it. But as you know, like even within this conversation, we are coming together and really collaborating and uplifting each other up. And everybody that's tuning in and watching us right now, that's really what it's all about. We are really interconnected, and a lot of us are really trying to find out, how can I be happy in this life? Like what do I need to do in
mhm.
order to live a balanced and happy life? And that's something I think that women and men want. We may not talk about it a lot, but it's just like that common goal. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, I know we're in the middle of a pandemic and we kind of mentioned it. I wanted to ask your opinion. How do you think the travel industry is going to change after this? And what are some ways that you've been coping during this pandemic?
Yeah, well, I think we're going to see a completely different, travel industry, certainly within the next year or two.
Hmm.
And that's not a bad thing. Um, I think people will remain a little bit closer to home. And I think we'll start to really, I mean, people are really going to discover the beautiful things they have in their own backyard that they've taken for granted.
Yeah.
Because we're never tourists, right, in our own home.
Yeah.
And so I think, that's one of the benefits. I think another thing we will pay more, closer attention to a lot of our local businesses,
Hmm.
the ones that survive,
Yeah.
post-pandemic, because many of the things that, the businesses that we've come to love and shop at, they're not going to be there. And so, that's something that will change. But I think safety is certainly going to be a paramount concern, and because of that, people are going to continue social distancing or physical distancing. And that's why I think things like camping and glamping and RV travel and, um, road trips to smaller towns, small secondary and tertiary cities
Mhm.
will be popular. And and the thing about those places, they weren't popular before the pandemic. People flocked to places like New York or Paris,
Yeah.
or Venice, and I think now there's a consciousness about you know the harm tourism can do. I mean, we were talking about a year ago about over tourism, and that's not it doesn't even uh, cross the minds of people these days.
Yeah.
But we've seen what tourism, too many tourists, and concentrated in a place, will do. And so I think people are, going to look at the smaller places for the fact that they'll have less travelers. They have a smaller population, and hopefully they want to spread the wealth, I guess, instead of concentrating on the bigger cities. I think it's my hope that people begin to connect to the destinations that they travel to, and
Mhm.
not just fly in and out and have a couple of
Yes.
nights on the beach, but really just get to connect and connect with the people who are there serving their drinks or their food, because those are the same people who experienced this pandemic as well.
Yeah.
And I think that will um, just be a beautiful thing to recognize, again, the common humanity we have shared through this common experience. Yeah, but closer people will stay closer to home. Somebody called it hyperlocalism, or
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's going to happen, and possibly even for us as travel journalists. We'll see. We'll see. Because we don't know what's going to happen with the airline industries or with the hotels, and if people are going to still be crowded on planes, if
Right.
prices are going to rise because there's been so much of an economic hit. These
Yes.
places and planes and these travel suppliers have taken. We don't know what's going to happen next. So, but beyond that, domestic travel, I think, in all countries, will be probably, we'll see a rise in that.
Mm-hmm.
So the Brits will stay in England, and the Yanks will stay in North America, Canadians will stay in Canada. So I think that's what we'll see.
And right now everybody's just staying at home, and maybe they want to be thinking about something else just for a little bit. And I know that you have a little something that you created for our audience. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, sometimes I try to pretend that I'm a photographer. And so we created a photo book called Island Hopping. And there are photographs that I've taken. And actually, my husband, I think there's a couple from him in there, of some of the islands that we've traveled on. And there's a little bit of information about the island, each respective island, a little history, some trivia. A lot of them are, they show the culture,
Mm.
and so it's just just a beautiful book to wander through, and begin thinking about your next travel plan.
Yeah, yeah, it's really just about, looking forward to something as well, right?
Yes.
Because even if we have to wait a couple of years to do international travel, it doesn't mean that you can't dream about it, that you're not allowed to even think about that. So, and the only way to access those places, if you don't want to do the good old Google search and see it on your computer, you can actually have something that you can experience too. So I think, and like buying books in general is going to become really popular too, because people, I think, are going to want to appreciate really like small, intimate moments again.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and, again, thank you so much that's so generous of you to share with our audience. And I like to finish our interviews with a little bit of a lighthearted question. The one that I have for you, maybe it's not so lighthearted, but I wanted just to kind of pick your brain on this. If we lived in a utopia where we didn't have to worry about world hunger and money and politics, like money, like that paper money, etc., what do you think this world would look like?
Heaven.
Oh, yes.
I mean, that's an easy one, because no war, no crime, no jealousy, no hatred, yeah. And I mean, picture the most beautiful place you've ever seen and multiply that by infinity.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would, that's what I hope for this world, and that's what I think utopia would represent.
Oh, I love that. Tonya, thank you so much. You've been amazing, and I'm sure everybody that's watching us is inspired as much as I am. Everything that we talked about, links will be provided down below. And again, thank you for being with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
And there you have it. Tonya, what a pleasure. Again, if you look up Tonya on LinkedIn and look at everything that she's done, I'll wait. But she is, again, to me, in my eyes, I'm in my early 30s, and I've switched around careers a lot, and I definitely, my resume, comparing it to hers, it's definitely very different. But I'm just so impressed at everything that she's done, and like you've seen it on our interview, even people like her are still getting a little bit nervous about reaching out to others, or making a difference, or really, we're human beings. Just because someone, I don't know, they're a lawyer, or they, again, they have a very impressive resume, it doesn't mean that they're not humans and that they don't feel the same things that we feel when we first start to embark on a new project, or maybe you're thinking about doing your own online business, especially during a time like this. I always like to remind, we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I want to challenge you in seeing what are some creative ways that you can substitute your income after this, or even during this. Maybe you lost your job and you're freaking out. I know unemployment hasn't been very helpful. I'm still waiting for that to come through. So again, and if you have kids and you're married, I can't imagine, how much more stress you might be feeling. So again, I want to challenge you in not being afraid to reach out to others, maybe finding a mentor, and also really thinking about being responsible, right? I know we talked a lot about that in this specific episode. How can we be a more responsible citizen and really respect the ones that are around us? So, and again, also take advantage of the beautiful gift that Tonya has created for us. Ebook full of beautiful photographs from all her travels, specifically islands, and also little information about each one. And again, I know that you can do this, and you can go online and you can go on Google and do that. But think about, just not having to deal with the ads popping on, and, like you have it all in one document. And I think that saves time and also lets you really enjoy the material, and that it's coming from someone that actually cares. And so don't forget, check it out. The links are going to be down below. If you have any questions, any thoughts about the series, if you're liking what you're seeing, if you want to hear more of a specific topic, let me know. You have my email now. When you signed up for these, you are now part of this community. So again, don't be afraid to reach out and ask me questions. Let me know what you're liking. What did you take from this specific interview? So again, that is all for me. I hope you all have a beautiful rest of your day. And I will see you on the next episode of She Travels After Quarantine. Besos. And I'll see you on the next episode of She Travels After Quarantine.